What was the legislature trying to tackle? What are they trying to address here?
I think the biggest thing that the legislature was rightfully trying to tackle is the disparity in homeownership rates between white households and households of color in the state of Minnesota.
Welcome to the ABC Realty podcast with Cian Thomas. This season, we focus on housing justice by amplifying the industry leaders driving positive change.
Hello, welcome to the ABC Realty Podcast Show. I'm your host. I'm Cian Thomas. This show explores issues at the intersection of housing, equity, and justice. Today we have a wonderful conversation for you to engage with us on, and I can't wait to jump into it, so let's go. We have Christina Akinola from Minnesota Housing and Finance Agency here with us, and we have Tiffany Phillips from Bell Bank here with us, and I'm going to have them introduce themselves.
Thank you, Cian. I'm really happy to be here. Thank you for the invite.
And I'm so excited, too, for this conversation. Thank you.
So let's start with you, Christina. Tell us who you are. Tell us what you do. Tell us why you're so bad.
Thank you so much for having me here, Cian.
Yeah.
It's a pleasure. I am Christina Akinola. I work on the business development team at Minnesota Housing. Minnesota Housing is the state's housing finance agency. I've been with the agency for about 11 years now. And in my role on the business development team, we help manage our lender network. We have about 110 approved lenders statewide that help originate our programs and get our programs into the community. In my role, I also manage the new lender approval process. So if we have lender networks, loan officers or lenders who want to become approved to offer Minnesota housing programs, I would be the person that they would reach out to, and we would start that process.
And Tiffany, please introduce yourself.
Thanks for having me, Cian. I'm Tiffany Phillips. I'm a mortgage loan originator with Bell Bank Mortgage. I'm also on the board of NARAB, stands for National Association of Real Estate Brokers, Twin Cities, and it is the trade organization that focuses on increasing homeownership in the African American community. So I'm excited to be here and talking about homeownership and equity. So very important to me, and thanks for having me.
Okay, so today I'm excited because we're talking about something that's unprecedented, right? We're talking about the first generation down payment assistance program. And there's actually two, which is why I have two of you here, right? There are two programs. And so I want Christina, if you can help us understand what is the state's version of the first generation down payment assistance program, and what are the goals of the program?
Awesome. So right before we get started, I need to read a disclosure to keep our legal team happy.
Okay.
So I'll have to sit. So I'll read this. In connection with single-family division loan programs, Minnesota Housing does not make or arrange loans. It is neither an originator nor creditor and is not affiliated with any lender. The terms of any mortgage finance transactions conducted in connection with these programs, including important information such as loan fees, the annual percentage rate, repayment conditions, disclosures, and any other materials which are required to be provided to the consumer, are the responsibility of the lender. So I mentioned in my introduction that we have about 110 approved lenders throughout the state, and so they help offer our programs. So the state's version of the first generation homebuyer program is someone who has not owned a home previously in any country, and their parents, so we go 2 generations deep, their parents have not owned a home in any country. There are some other definitions out there where they say they haven't owned a home in the last 3 years. That is not the definition. For Minnesota housing purposes, an individual has not owned a home in any country, and their parents have not owned a home in any country. That is the definition of a first-gen home buyer for Minnesota housing purposes. And this program came about through state appropriations through our legislature.
Mm-hmm.
They want to help increase homeownership in Black and Brown communities or in immigrant communities, as well as foundational Black communities here in Minnesota, because we have a huge homeownership disparity gap. And so the legislature appropriated $50 million for Minnesota housing, and program Tiffany will be talking about, they appropriated $100 million for the MMCDC program. So our first gen program, we have $50 million, and currently the program is offering up to $35,000 in down payment and closing cost assistance funds for first generation home buyers.
So what does that mean to a buyer to have this down payment and closing cost assistance? How does it shake out in an actual transaction purpose?
It's huge. It's huge. We know that the number one reason most people don't get into home ownership is down payment and closing cost funds. That is the number one barrier for home ownership, especially in Black and Brown communities. And so the $35,000 that Minnesota Housing has to offer, the way we have structured this loan is that it's a loan, so I deliberately use the term loan.
Okay.
However, it is a forgivable loan. It's a 20-year term, and the way we've structured our program is that after 10 years, 50% of the amount that the client borrows is forgiven. That's on the anniversary of the closing date. 50% of that loan amount is forgiven, and then at the anniversary of the 20th year of homeownership, the remaining amount is forgiven. The remaining 50% is forgiven. So when a client comes into a transaction with a potential $35,000, that's huge.
Right.
We believe that really makes home ownership possible. We do have programs over and above the first gen program. We do have our main program, which has to be used in conjunction with this first gen program, is called Startup. And our startup programs offer up to $18,000 in down payment assistance. It's a first-time home buyer loan, which your client or an individual who is a first-gen buyer will most likely be a first-time home buyer. So we qualify them as a first-time home buyer, which means they've not had an ownership interest in a principal residence in the last 3 years. That's the definition for first-time home buyer. That gets them into our first mortgage program, which is Startup. So a loan officer or a consumer looking at this, think about this. If your client is a first-time home buyer, we put that aside and they qualify for that. And then we add the layer for first gen. We're now looking at the fact that they've never owned a home.
Sure.
For a first-time home buyer, they might have owned a home in the last 3 years. But for first gen, they've never owned a home. And then one thing I forgot to add previously was they might have owned a home, but if they lost it due to foreclosure, not any other kind of disaster, not a deed in lieu of foreclosure, not a short sale, but if they owned a home prior and lost it due to foreclosure, then they could possibly qualify as a first-gen home buyer again. Okay, so if they qualify for first-gen funds, now they have access to not only the $35,000 that the state legislature appropriated that we decided based off the appropriations to give our first-generation home buyers, but they also have access to the down payment assistance funds through our regular programs, which could be $16,500 or up to $18,000. Potentially, a client could get up to $53,000 in down payment assistance.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, so if I'm a buyer and I am approved to $150,000 to go out and buy a home, and I think that you guys can agree with me that that's not realistic in this marketplace with a Twin Cities median home price of $325 or $375?
I thought it was closer to $370.
$370. The median home in the Twin Cities market today is selling for $370. So if I'm only approved to $150, I could literally add $53,000 onto that, and now I can shop at $203.
Correct.
Right? Or somewhere near there, because I still have some other costs involved with closing that transaction.
That is correct.
That's powerful.
Yes, it is.
That is powerful.
Because it also allows you to increase the amount of your down payment, right? So if we think about someone buying a house for $200,000 and they have $53,000 to put towards that transaction, now they don't have mortgage insurance, right? Because they're putting at least 20% down. So their monthly payments is going to go down, making homeownership more affordable for them, allowing them to have more disposable assets on a monthly basis, right?
Wow.
So yeah, it, as Christina said, is huge and can have huge impact.
Wow. Wow. And I like that you can layer it with some of the other programs and products through MHFA.
Yes. And actually, we don't only allow layering with our products. If there are community seconds that a loan officer or a real estate agent know about, our programs allow several layers as long as that program allows it.
Wow. So if I'm shopping in Ramsey County and Ramsey County has a bucket of money and they're offering $10,000 toward your purchase, then we could add that onto the 53. Now it becomes 63,000.
Yeah. What's even more powerful? What's even more powerful is Ramsey County has a first generation program also. So if that person qualifies for first generation with Minnesota Housing, they likely qualify for first generation with Ramsey County. And Ramsey County's first generation is offering up to 25% of your purchase price, $93,000, up to 25% of the purchase price to help subsidize your purchase. Capped at 93 because the maximum purchase price for their program is $372,000. 25% of that is about $93,000. So you would then have that 93
plus
with
the 53.
Yep.
Yeah, so it could be very powerful in helping people with that affordability gap.
Wow. Okay, so I want to introduce you, Tiffany Phillips of Bell Bank, to talk about the first generation program, but this one is administered through the community, if you will, right? Tell us about and I think you said the acronym
MMCDC.
MMCDC.
Minnesota Midwest Community Development Corporation.
Minnesota Midwest Community Development Corporation is the administrator of those funds, and that's the $100 million, right?
Yes, but the funds will actually be administered by community nonprofits. So there are several community nonprofits that have been selected that will administer the funds. So Christina mentioned there's $150 total for first generation. Minnesota Housing has $50. This program has $100 million. The programs are similar, especially as far as dollar amount. So the community program for up to $100 million, each person can get up to $32,000 for the community version of the program. Some key differences is the forgiveness period. So the forgiveness period for the community program is over 5 years.
Wow.
So they will forgive 20% of that loan amount every year for 5 years.
And it disappears at the end of
5 years, it's over, right? So if you sell the home within 4 years, you've gotten rid of 80% of it, and you would still owe the remaining 20%. So it's a fabulous forgiveness term. I think people will definitely want to take advantage of it. The other key difference is there's a cap, right? So Minnesota Housing is going to let you use up to $35,000. They do have their own cap too. You have to make sure that your mortgage payment is at least 28% of your gross income. If that mortgage payment is not at least 28% of your gross income, we're going to have to reduce one of those loan amounts so that you are using at least 28% of your gross income. In order to use that program. This program, the special caveat for it is they will not loan you more than 10% of the purchase price. So in Christina's example, we talked about a $200,000 purchase price. They can use all of those funds for their $200,000 purchase price. In this example, they would only borrow them up to $20,000 because they are capping that out at 10%. Of the purchase price. So there are two different caveats, but they are forgivable loans, and depending on what someone's need is, I think that's how they're going to determine which of the programs make the most sense for them. So like if you have someone that needs a lot of affordability gap and they're shopping in that lower price point, maybe high 100s, low 200s, they're probably going to use the state's program because the state can give them up to $35,000, whereas the community program is going to cap them at $17,500 if they're buying a house for $175, or $20,000 if they're buying a house for $200,000. Another key difference is Minnesota Housing, you have to wait until you have an accepted purchase agreement in order to get those funds. The community fund will allow us to do a reservation of funds. So once you've been pre-approved by a lender, you would have the opportunity to go to a website. It's not available yet, but once that website comes out, the consumer, because they won't allow us to do it as the lender, the consumer will go to that website, complete the first generation application, and then that application will be routed to one of the nonprofits that have been selected to administer that program.
Wow.
and they'll reserve those funds for them.
Can you use the two programs together?
You cannot. you cannot use the two programs together. No. But what we could do, we could use the community 32,000 with Minnesota Housing's 18,000.
Right.
So that way they don't have that 35,000 that's forgiven over 20 years.
Right.
They would have the 32,000 that's forgiven over 5 years, but they still can take advantage of Minnesota Housing startup program of up to $18,000. So that person would have 50 instead of 53, but that 32 is forgiven over 5 years instead of waiting till 20.
And that's only if the purchase price is $320,000.
That would be the only instance you would get 32,000 because it's up to 10% of the purchase
capped
price.
at 10% of the purchase price.
Correct.
And the reason why there's no commingling of those two first-gen programs is because it's from the same pot. So it'd be like double dipping. It's the same state appropriation. It was $150 million appropriated. $50 million came to Minnesota Housing. The remaining $100 million went to MMCDC. So it's the same pot of money. That's why we can't layer those.
Gotcha.
And what Tiffany is talking about, layering it with a Minnesota Housing program, that consumer would have to use a Minnesota Housing first mortgage in order to use our regular down payment assistance and closing costs loans. That's where they would get up to $50,000.
Yep.
Coming up, we continue our conversation on home ownership in Minnesota, exploring why lawmakers are now allocating resources to address disparities. But first, homeowner inspection tips and a hot new listing near you.
Hey everyone, Emerald Sawyer, owner of Value Home Inspections, and today's tip when looking for a home is to save about $700 to $1,000 for an inspection. It does sound like a lot, and it is, but the average inspection is about $350. So let's say you get a home inspection for $350, and for whatever reason, it falls through. Of course, when you find your second property, you want to get another inspection. So right there, you're already at $700. As far as $700 to $1,000, I would recommend getting some additional services, so a radon test and or a sewer scope inspection. And for add-on services, they average to about like $250. So you are looking at $700 to $1,000 on average. And then, of course, the square footage of the home could change the pricing as far as the age of the property, if the home inspector has to travel a long distance, and once again, add-ons. So if you have $700 to $1,000, that should cover you for either 2 inspections or a residential inspection, as well as 1 or 2 add-ons. If you have any additional questions, feel free to reach out at valueinspections.llc.com.
Hot new listing. 661 North Street, near Sweet Hallow Park in St. Paul, is the perfect place to call home. If you're in the market for a new home, check out this 4-bedroom, 2-bathroom house with a 2-car garage. Schedule your tour today. Call 651-230-4070. That's 651-230-4070.
Let's talk about why this historic appropriation, $150 million. Never has happened before.
Never has happened.
Yeah.
Likely won't ever happen again.
Yeah, it'd be
Possibly,
nice, right? Yeah, it'd be nice.
We can keep our
But
fingers
so what happened at the legislature to say, hey man, we need to appropriate some real money toward home ownership, so making home ownership more accessible and more affordable. What was the legislature trying to tackle? What are they trying to address here?
I think the biggest thing that the legislature was rightfully trying to tackle is the disparity in home ownership rates between white households and households of color in the state of Minnesota. The acronym we use at Minnesota Housing is BIPOC. That's Black, Indigenous, and People of Color. So there's a whole slew of people that we categorize in that category. Basically, anybody who's not white.
Right.
So homeownership rates in the state of Minnesota are at 77% for our white households, and that 77%
of white households own their home.
Households own their own home.
Okay.
So we are definitely a state that values home ownership.
Right.
But amongst the various minority households, I'll quote our Black stat right now, we're at 34%.
So 34% of Black households in Minnesota
Own
own
their
their own home.
Yes.
Oh, that's an increase.
That is
I,
an increase.
I have
Yeah.
not heard that number.
Yeah, I thought it
34%.
was
According to our
24.
research community,
Uh-huh.
research department, right now it's 34%.
Wow.
So there's about a 40% gap between white households and
Right.
black households.
Right. 77 minus 30.
Yeah. So about
That's huge.
40%. And we're the fourth worst in the nation.
Fourth worst
Fourth
state in the
worst.
nation
Yep.
with this disparity.
Yep. We are
between-
even worse than Mississippi and Alabama in the disparity gap between white and black households.
What drives that? Why is that?
I would say they've just been accumulating for decades, right? So
Yeah.
we think about in Minnesota, we have a crazy history with racial covenants, right?
Mm-hmm.
That there were language added to property deeds that said you could not sell your home to a person of African descent. So that's going to limit people's ability to purchase a home, right? And that's, that was in place for decades, and there's work being done to identify the properties that have that in their deeds and, remove the language. Of course, it became illegal to discriminate against someone, decades ago. But ironically, our home ownership rate has not increased since fair housing, became active in, I want to say, the 60s. So there is a lot of work to do. I also think there's an information gap. So we don't know that we can truly achieve home ownership. A lot of us come from generations of renters, right? So
Right,
I'm
right.
one of those
We
people
know what we know.
who just come from generations of renters. And if you come from that and everyone around you rent, you don't necessarily believe that you can be a homeowner.
Right.
And you couple that with racial injustices that will truly prevent you from becoming a homeowner. And then also,
Can you give me an
historically
example?
the racial covenants, like you
Right,
can't,
so the
you
racial
can't buy a
covenants,
home.
yeah.
And then if you do buy a home, we historically have redlining, where they will purposely put you in or steer you to an area that's less desirable, where your home ownership value won't increase as much as it would
Right.
increase in other areas.
Case in point, historically North Minneapolis.
Exactly.
Case in point, historically the east side of St. Paul.
Yes.
Case in point, historically Frogtown.
And that's where you would be steered to, and they would steer you away from Highland, right?
Yes.
Like
Highland Park,
you're
Como
qualified,
Park.
but you
Right.
cannot buy,
Right.
in Highland. That is not for you, right?
Right.
So those are the barriers that were put in place for people that look like us,
Right.
that prevented people from achieving home ownership. And if you get told over and over again that something isn't for you and you can't do it, you just kind of get comfortable in that space.
Right, you
And
believe it.
just continue status quo. And for us, unfortunately, that's just been continuing to rent. And so that's why I'm passionate about working in this space. That's why I joined NARAB, the National Association of Real Estate Brokers, who focuses on increasing homeownership in the Black community, because the homeownership gap contributes to a wealth gap, right?
Absolutely.
So
Amen.
people who own homes have net worth that's about 40 times that of a renter.
40
40.
times.
40 times.
So if you own a home, you have, and these numbers are, average. So let's say
Right.
you own a home, your estimated is what I should say. Your estimated net worth is about $340,000.
Right.
And if you rent a home, your estimated net worth is about $8,000.
Say that again, Tiffany.
$340,000 compared to $8,000.
Wow.
Right? That's
Wow.
huge.
Wow.
And then when you pull out Black renters, it's zero
Zero.
net worth. Right?
Wow.
So achieving home ownership is our way to overcome the wealth gap. And if people don't know that home ownership is possible for them, they'll continue to rent. And unfortunately, some people are paying $1,800, $2,000. My cousin was paying $2,300 for rent.
$2,300 a month.
$2,300 a month for rent.
What?
Right?
A 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom?
Two-bedroom,
What?
downtown St.
A
Paul.
2-bedroom apartment for $2,300.
It included parking, though. But yeah.
Ooh, parking
Yeah,
at
20
a premium.
Right? $2,300. So
Wow.
when I look at what some of my clients are able to achieve home ownership, I had a client last month that purchased a home with the land trust in Minneapolis. She bought a house for $360,000. Her payment was $1,300.
Right?
Right?
I know who you're talking about.
$1,300, right? So It's like let's help people achieve home ownership
so
in a way
that's a
affordable
mortgage
for them.
versus a $2,300 a month
Rent payment.
Yeah. So you get the equity too.
Exactly.
Right?
That you get to take advantage of. You may want to use your equity in your home to send your children to school, start a business, buy an investment property. You get to do that.
And if you're wondering real quick what we mean when we use this term equity is the difference between your home's value, your home's market value, and the amount you owe on the mortgage. So that difference is your equity. And you can tap that difference to, as Tiffany said, send your children to college, help pay their tuition, start a business, right? Send yourself to school. And there's that is the wealth. That's the real long-term wealth benefit of home ownership versus renting.
Yes. And that gets right back to the heart of your question, your original question, Cian, about why did legislators sit down and decide to do this? It's not just bridging the gap, it's bridging the generational wealth gap.
Right.
And so bridging the generational wealth gap, that was a wonderful statistic that Tiffany just quoted. For sure, one of the biggest indicators of a person's or a family's health is home ownership.
Right.
So if a renter household has a net worth of $8,000 and in the Black community zero, how do their kids get ahead? How do they have money for sporting events? How are they robustly and roundly educated? They're not, because they don't have anything to tap into. So if you don't even see a path to sending your kids to college, there's lots of people we know that tapped into the equity of their homes to send their kids to college. Absolutely. Their kids are doctors, lawyers, engineers today, and that's how the families come up. So this is part of the thought process behind the legislature sitting down and saying we need to help our Black and brown communities.
Yeah, imagine if the entire Black and brown community has been sidelined.
Yes.
What would our economy look like?
Absolutely.
In Minnesota? Would we be an attractive place for people to come and live and work and play? No, we wouldn't. We wouldn't. So it also benefits the state of Minnesota to pull people off the sidelines and have them engage in the economic engine of Minnesota. And the data does show that children of parents who own their home, they do better in school. Where neighborhoods where there is a higher rate of home ownership, they have less crime, right? They have more engaged members of the community because they're there. Look, I've been in my house for 37 years. I have raised my 3 boys in the same house. You know, they went to the same school. Their teachers knew them. Their teachers knew me. Right. So they did well in school. They did well in community. You know, they were able to make those relationships with teachers. When you rent and you're moving around a lot, you know, you may be in a school this year, but you may not be at that school next year because you've had to move because your rent got jacked up, or who knows what. I mean, lots of different reasons, factors that impact renters, right? That don't impact homeowners.
I think so. I moved here when I was in 5th grade, originally from Chicago, and we know elementary school ends at 6th grade, and I think I went to 5 elementary schools.
Wow.
Between 5th and 6th grade. Right? So you talk about moving and the lack of stability when you're renting that you can have with home ownership. It's key.
It's night and day, isn't it?
Up next, we explore the current housing market in Minnesota and whether it's a good or bad time to purchase a home. But first, your smart money moves and insight on our big ABC 50 commitment. We'll be back after this.
Hey, Tiffany, back with your smart money move for this month. Today, we're going to talk about becoming a homeowner and why you should consider becoming a homeowner. This is near and dear to my heart. This is the space that I work in. We're here in Minnesota, and we have one of the largest homeownership gaps in the country. So, again, this is why it's important to me to talk to you all about homeownership and reasons why you want to consider becoming a homeowner. First and foremost, people who own a home, they have a net worth that's 40 times that of a renter. So I'm going to put that into numbers for you. If you are a homeowner, your average net worth is about $340,000. If you are a renter, and I'm going to pull out non-Black renters, if you are a renter of anything outside of Black renters, your average net worth is $8,000. And when I just target Black renters, the average net worth is $0. So this is why we want to become a homeowner, because ultimately we're paying to live somewhere anyway. And instead of paying for someone else's property to help them retire more comfortably, to help them create freedom for themselves and their family, I think we should do that for ourselves. So one reason why you want to become a homeowner. Another key reason is the benefit for your children. Children who grow up in homes that their parents own, they are happy, their emotional stability is greater, they are more successful in school, and I got that information truly from a study with the Institute of Family Health. So those are true statistics about the positive benefits of homeownership in the impact of your children. I mentioned creating wealth for yourself within your net worth. You get to do things with that wealth that you're creating for yourself. So you're going to create equity as you own your home. You get to use that equity, potentially start a business. You get to use that equity to send your children to college. You get to use that equity maybe to buy another property. And now you're going to be a landlord and you have additional properties to increase wealth for yourself and build it for generations to come. And you can also look at buying like a multi-unit property, right? You buy a multi-unit property. I have a son, he recently graduated from college and he's interested in becoming a homeowner. His goal is to purchase a duplex. He's going to buy a duplex. He's going to rent out one side of it. So his housing payment is more affordable for him, allowing him to save more, create more freedom for himself so he can achieve other goals as well. So homeownership can seem daunting. I know in our community, a lot of us come from generations of renters. I came from generations of renters. So when I became a homeowner in 2011, I was the first in my family to do that. But now, 12 years later, my value has tripled. My home has tripled in value, right? And if I had decided to retain my renting status, I would not have that as part of my net worth. So it can seem overwhelming and daunting, but just know we have another money move coming for you next month to help you understand how to achieve that for yourself.
Want to own your own home? We're helping 50 families make the leap from renting to owning their dream homes this year. Find out how you can receive up to $35,000 towards your down payment. And let's embark on this journey towards homeownership together. Call 651-230-4070 to learn more.
Powerful stuff. So this leads me to my next question then. Why is now a good time to buy? in a market where mortgage interest rates are north of 7%, and we have unprecedentedly high, housing prices.
It is a good time to buy because you're either paying your own mortgage or you're paying your landlord's mortgage. Mm-hmm. How about think about it from that perspective?
Right, yeah.
You're paying somebody else's mortgage or you're paying your own.
Right.
So even though the rates are high, we don't know if rates are ever going to go down. But I do remember a quote from a good friend of mine that he said a couple years ago, and he says, "Date the rate, marry the house." So
date the rate, marry the house.
Yes,
I like that.
You can always refinance when or if rates go down. That's always a possibility. And then another really good reason why this is the time to buy, if you're sitting on the fence, is this unprecedented money that's out there to get you into homeownership. You can, again, as we talked about earlier in the podcast, there's so much money to layer on top to make sure that your mortgage payment remains affordable. I mean, even if life happens I'm talking about Minnesota housing programs, specifically now where the forgiveness starts at the 10-year mark. Let's say something happened and you absolutely had to move at the 5-year mark. You were still in a house that you could afford your monthly payment versus, as Tiffany mentioned with her cousin who's paying $2,300, if you were that client of hers who got into a land trust plus whatever other down payment they used, and they're at $1,300, how much better would your life be that you had a little bit more disposable income? If we use those two examples, whoever that is has about at least $1,000 disposable income that you can use towards your life.
Right.
The betterment of your life, whether that is a little bit of a car payment, whether you're investing in the stock market, whether you're building a business, that's disposable income that you have access to. So I'll let Tiffany take that.
I think that was perfect. I don't even
Well
know.
said,
I don't
yeah.
even know if we need to add.
Well said.
But honestly, I think to Cian's point about the stability and betterment of your children, right? So we want to carry about our legacy and what we're leaving for our children. So I have a young son. He's 23. I've talked to him about homeownership for years. He's interested in becoming a homeowner. I talked to him about the land trust. He got a job. He makes a living. I say, I think you should afford homeownership, better, more affordably, have more capital to set aside for when you're ready to start a family. Use these programs. He can't use First Gen because we own a home now, but he can take advantage of the other programs that'll help him achieve homeownership more affordably. I think the key, as I pointed out a little bit ago, and saying it's important that we share the repayment and make sure our customers know that these loans are typically loans, and if you don't stay in enough time to have the forgiveness period, it will still be there. So when we layer these programs to help you achieve homeownership more affordably, if nothing is forgiven, it may take you a while to truly accumulate the equity that you want to tap into for those other reasons. And that's why I think that community version of the First Generation program is going to be more ideal for a lot of people, because in a shorter period of time, they're going to realize that equity of up to $32,000 and be able to tap into that for multiple reasons.
How many families do we think can be helped with this $150 million?
I estimated like 6,000, somewhere around there. When we take the 150, I first looked at Minnesota Housing's amount of $50,000 and divided it by 50 million and divided it by 35,000. And then I did the same with the 100 million and divided it by 32,000. And then that also didn't account for people taking less than the full amount because their purchase price is less, or they're not using 28% of their income as it relates to Minnesota Housing. So I think it'll be probably closer to 7 or 8, but for sure at least 6,000.
Yeah. At least I know for sure that Minnesota Housing is estimating we'll be helping at least 1,500 clients with the money that we have.
Yep.
So your math is spot on.
Yeah, it should be
if people
around
take
there.
less, and again, like Tiffany said, nobody's required to take out the 35,000 because ultimately at the end of the day, it is a loan. Especially so if people go into this using this program, knowing fully well that they may not stay in the home beyond the 10-year mark, then maybe they don't want to take out the full amount, or maybe there's a community grant that they want to access and make sure that their loan amount is less. They don't have to take out the full amount, but for the full amount, we are estimating about helping about 1,500 households.
So let's say if there's a total of estimate of about 6,000 households, let's say that half of those households are households of color, what would that do to the home ownership gap?
That's a great question.
That is a great. I mean, I don't know the statistics of the number of African Americans in the state to say what that increase would do to the numbers, but it's definitely going to give us a lift.
It'll move
the needle for sure, which I'm excited to see. I mean, all the work that all us community people do, like Christina in Minnesota Housing being at events, and NARAB focusing on educating the community on the possibility of homeownership. All of that work that we're constantly doing should all be contributing towards the needle move. So when Christina mentioned homeownership in the state of Minnesota increasing to 34%, I would like to say with that number, if it's accurate, that is attributed to all the work that everyone is doing in community to talk to people about the possibility of homeownership. So it excites me.
Absolutely.
Sure.
It is very exciting, very exciting. And I will say, and even though we can't answer that specific question because it's difficult to quantify what all the work that the various organizations are doing to move that needle, I will say at Minnesota Housing, we've always had a focus on moving the needle towards home ownership for our Black and brown communities, our BIPOC communities. Our mission goal, even prior to the First Gen program, was to have 40% of our loans go to households of color. And that is unprecedented amongst our traditional lenders throughout the state.
Has that always been the goal?
It hasn't always been the goal. When I joined Minnesota Housing back in 2013, so about 11 years ago, our goal at the time was either 12 or 15% of our programs to go to households of color. But it's always been our mission to help households of color. And so just sitting down at the agency with our program people, legal, compliance, marketing, we came up with a goal of 40% about 5 years ago. And we've worked tirelessly towards this goal, collaborating with community partners, collaborating with our lenders, our real estate partners, to help people understand that they can get into homeownership using our programs.
So if I'm a realtor, what can I do to know about this program, this first generation program? Where can I go to get the information so that I can serve my clients?
I love that. So there's a website, firstgendpa.org. There are tools and trainings listed there. So there have been several trainings for both the community program and the Minnesota housing program. So firstgendpa.org has those trainings and resources on there. Minnesota Housing also has their trainings on their site. So that's where I would direct people to, firstgendpa.org and Minnesota Housing's minnesotahousing.gov, right?
So our website is mnhousing.gov. And just like Tiffany mentioned, we also have our own specific first gen program. And so all the details of our first gen program are under the training tab on our website. That's again, mnhousing.gov.
Great. Under the training tab. So ladies, gentlemen, we have had an incredible conversation today about the first generation homeownership program administered through the state and administered through the community and the nonprofits. We've talked about the reason why, the need for it, and that comes straight from the legislature. I think that's amazing, amazing. And now you know where to go for more information. You can go to Minnesota Housing's website at mnhousing.gov.
Yeah.
Or you can go to the community website, which is firstgendpa.org, and you can learn more about these programs, because the MHFA program is out there now. May
6th it launched. Yep.
And the other program, the community program, is expected to roll out sometime this month or next month, perhaps. We don't have a date yet. So don't let anybody tell you that you can't be a homeowner.
Yeah.
Now is the time. When we all do better, we all do better.
That's right.
Right? Mm-hmm. Amen. So thank you for being with us today for ABC Realty's first podcast show. I'm C.N. Thomas. I'm the host of the show. We love having you here. We hope to hear from you. Give us some feedback on how relevant and timely the information is, because that's our aim. We want to talk about relevant and timely conversations around issues of housing, justice, and equity. Thank you.
Thanks so much for listening to the ABC Realty Podcast with C.N. Thomas. You won't want to miss our next episode, where we'll sit down with Damon Mason and Makia Griffin of Rondo Community Land Trust to learn more about the intricacies of land trusts and explore their historical significance in Black America. In the meantime, make sure to follow ABC Realty on all platforms for the latest in housing justice.